Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and today's review is the topping A90D, or the A90 Discrete Headphone Amplifier. All right, this was sent to me by Apos Audio for review. They have asked nothing in return other than a fair and honest evaluation. The link that you will see below in the description is an affiliate link if you should choose to buy this product. Based on my review, I will get a few bucks in return. Okay, but again, otherwise, Apos has not made any attempt to influence my opinion in one way or the other. So all of the thoughts you are about to hear are mine and mine alone. So let's get into shameless self-promotion, and then we will come back with the review. Hey, thanks for watching this video. Please remember to hit that like button, and if you haven't, please subscribe. Also, I have a Patreon set up so that you can help support me on a monthly basis, and I've set up a PayPal donation so that you can help me out in that way too if a monthly subscription does not make sense for you. Links for all of that, including the benefits, in the description below. Please check those out. All right, on with the show. All right, so the A90D, which stands for A90 Discrete, is Topping's new flagship solid-state headphone amplifier. It comes in at $599 US, and again is available from Apos Audio and a few other places, but I will put a link to Apos' site as an affiliate link down below. All right, so the specs on this one, as the specs are with pretty much every topping amplifier, are spectacular, right? So $599 US comes right in at the $600 price point. Okay, and then other than that, its power output is rated at 9,800 milliwatts per channel at 16 ohms from the balanced headphone output. So 9,800 milliwatts is 9.8 watts. Okay, so nearly 10 watts per channel of rated power output here, which is huge. It also is rated to deliver up to 49 volts of output, which can be important for high impedance loads. All that. Now, the D part in the discrete here is because the topography of this thing is built around two discrete NFC-A amp circuits, which is Topping's in-house solution that they have been using for a while now and keep improving upon in their amp circuitry in all of their amplifiers. So just another iteration, but really two of them in a discrete design are in here. So this is a fully balanced amplifier, and you will notice that there is a significant drop-off by about half, okay, of power from the single-ended output than there is from either of the balanced outputs. And that is because when you engage the single-ended connection, you're only using one of those NFC-A amp stages instead of the both of them together. All right, other than that, there have been some feature upgrades and changes from the original A90D, or excuse me, the original A90, the not discrete version. And so you can see some of them right here on the front panel to begin with. Like for one, we don't have just the simple toggle switches on the front anymore. The user interface has been redesigned to well, you interact with it differently, right? So this volume knob here is also a volume knob, but it's also a push button. Push and hold to power it on and off from standby mode, turn it to adjust volume, quick tap it to select inputs and gain settings and all of that kind of stuff. Now, there is a bug in the original firmware that I understand, which makes some of that stuff like switching gains, switching inputs, that sort of thing, inaccessible from using just the front panel controls, and you have to use the remote, which is right over here. 1 second. Got it. Okay. You need to use the included remote control, which is another new feature from the old version. The original version did not have a remote control. This one does. Okay, and all that to access some of those things. Now, I understand there's a firmware update out there somewhere where you can fix that and control everything from the front panel if you need to. At least I'm pretty sure that's accurate. Apologies if it is not. I'm sure someone will correct in the comments if it isn't. Okay, all right, so that's a thing and all that. We have this LED-based volume indicator in here that goes from 00 to 99 out there for the volume control. And other than that, we just have little LED lights right here that light up to tell you whether you have selected the RCA or XLR input, right, or the EXT, the external connection here, which I'll get to that in just a moment. And then on this side, we have indicators, LED indicators for power on, off, whether you have engaged the headphone amplifier output or the preamp outputs. Okay, so when we get to the back panel, we'll talk about that in a little bit here too. So other than that, the connections for headphones are the same as the original A90 in that we have a 4-pin balanced XLR output and a 4.4 millimeter Pentacon balanced output, and then we have the 6.35 millimeter / 1/4 inch single-ended output as well. This volume knob here is connected to a new potentiometer, so an upgraded potentiometer from the original A90. This is an R2R volume controller in here, which, yes, that R2R means a resistor ladder in a very similar way that many DACs, digital analog converters, use resistor ladders to do digital to analog conversion. Okay, we call those R2R or ladder DACs. So a similar kind of circuit design is attached to the volume control in here, the potentiometer, where an array of resistors is laid out in a ladder-like pattern, and then rotating the volume knob engages certain numbers of those resistors so that you get different levels of attenuation of the volume, specifically 99 of them, because this goes from 0 to 99 here. All right, and the reason that they have done that is that the old potentiometer could suffer from some channel imbalance, particularly in its low ranges. That's pretty common for a lot of analog potentiometers, is low-level channel imbalance. So the original A90 was intended to be super clean and clear and be able to power just about any kind of head-based transducer you want to plug into it, such as IEMs all the way up through super hard to drive high impedance loads and low efficiency planar magnetic headphones and that sort of thing. An issue that you could run into with IEMs, because they tend to be very easy to drive and very efficient, okay, at least compared to full-size headphones, is that at normal gain settings, you would be in that lower range of the potentiometer where there is a channel imbalance, and an audible one at that. So in the original A90, Topping got around that by including 3 gain stages, a negative, a normal, and then a high. Here in the A90D, because this R2R potentiometer has much better channel balance, through its entire range, they have dropped the negative gain stage in this amp. And so there are 2 gain stages here, just the normal and then the high. Okay, but you're probably not going to miss the negative if you're an IEM user, just because the volume control is much better balanced at the low ranges. You'll likely be fine. All right, so I think that's about it for the front panel of this thing. Let's flip it around and look at the back. And we see the classic AC power input here. We have a 12-volt trigger connector right here so that you can use this to power on and off another device that has a 12-volt trigger connection on it too. Right? And then we also have a ground lift switch here, which may or may not be necessary for you. If you are in a situation where the power is in your house or apartment or wherever you are is not very clean and you're getting some ground noise, you can just flip this switch and see if that makes a difference and takes out like ground loops and things of that nature. Then we have the preamp outputs here next. We see that we have dual balanced 3-pin XLR and then single-ended RCA pre-outputs, and then we have the same complement for inputs. And then we have this fun little connector here. This is the EXT. This is a proprietary connection between topping products. So if you have a topping, I think the the D90 series of DACs has a similar connector on this, and their pre-90 preamp has such a connection. Maybe just the pre-90 and not the D90s. Anyway, has this proprietary connection here where you can just run an umbilical between the two and then use that input there as well if you choose to go deep into the topping ecosystem that way. All right, but overall, the build on this is pretty solid. Like, I think this front panel is plastic, but it feels pretty solid. We've got this aluminum casing here. It is a well-built, solid unit. It's not super heavy. It does not have a toroidal transformer in it. It has a some kind of special fancy linear switching kind of power supply in it, which seems like it's okay for the most part, but it's not the heftiest device either. So it's like, it doesn't have quite the weight that other amplifiers at this price point that use more traditional amp topographies or topologies, it's one of those words, okay, use. All right, but overall, I think the unit, it's well built, it's easy to use, it's got this really kind of minimalistic industrial kind of aesthetic to it, which, I mean, isn't fancy. It gets the job done, and I mean, it's fine. No real complaints there. And then, of course, you get the obligatory and completely unnecessary high-resolution audio sticker on the top. Okay, so again, $600 flagship amplifiers. Usually you don't see a flagship from a company's line at $600, but that's just kind of Topping's game. The other thing that is Topping's game is measurements. If you care about the measurements, this thing is squeaky clean, right? The signal to noise ratio is something like 145 decibels. It's crazy high. The synad is crazy high. The distortion is something like 0.000055%. Something like that, okay? Just something ridiculously low, okay? And yeah, so like, that is what Topping does. Like, they design their amplifiers to tickle an audio precision measurement rig in all the right ways. And this one definitely does that. So if that is important to you, here it is with all of those other features that I just mentioned. All right, so with that done, let's go ahead and talk about sound. Now, I'm going to preface this sound section with a little bit of a disclaimer here. If you follow my channel and you have seen my other Topping amp reviews, and there have been several, and I'll put links in the description to all of those too. Let's see, what have I reviewed from Topping before? From just an amplifier standpoint, I have reviewed the original L30, the A50S, the A30 Pro, the A90, the DX7 Pro Plus, which is a DAC amp, but still has an amp in it. I owned for a while their portable NX4 DSD, okay, and now I'm reviewing this one. So that's like the 7th Topping product that I have either owned or reviewed that has a headphone amplifier stage in it. Okay, and if you have seen or read my reviews of many of those, I have not been a fan. And I realize that that makes me a bit of an outlier, at least in the YouTube sphere, in terms of reviewers who are not super high on Topping amplifiers. I have some hypotheses to explain the disconnect between what the measurements say should be going on and what I'm actually hearing. And I will come back and I will hit that at the end of this video. So if you are watching this one, my channel, if you are new to my channel, and what I'm about to say really surprises you, I encourage you to stick around and to listen to those explanations, because I've put a lot of thought into this and I've come up with some ideas that I want to share, all right, and offer those to the community as to what's going on. So that'll be at the end. Please stick around for that. Okay. So then back to the sound of this unit. The test gear that I used to evaluate this. The two DACs that I used were either the Schiit Bifrost 2/64 or going way up, scaling way up and using my Berkeley Alpha Series 2, which is connected to a Singer SU2 digital-to-digital converter, which is then connected via USB to my desktop computer. I primarily used the balanced XLR connections for the inputs, and then I mostly used the 4-pin balanced XLR headphone output, because by far and away that's how most of my headphone cables are made. Okay, so that's there. Now, as far as the headphones that I plugged into this thing, I tried basically all of the major headphone types on this. So a couple of low impedance dynamic driver headphones include the Focal Radiance and the JM OCD Extreme Stealth Edition, which is a Hi-Fi-Man HER9 mod, and I just reviewed those recently, and so there will be a link in the description for those, as well as the Radiance. I used a couple of high impedance dynamic driver headphones, the 300 ohm Sennheiser HD6XX, which was the collab with Massdrop and is essentially an HD650. And then the 600 ohm Beyerdynamic DT880, which I have personally balanced modded to use detachable cables so that I can use that with the balanced output of balanced headphone amps. I tried high efficiency planar magnetic headphones both from Hi-Fi-Man, the Ananda Stealth Magnet Edition and the HE1000 SE, and then a couple of really inefficient and hard to drive planar magnetic headphones also from Hi-Fi-Man, and that would be the HE6 SE-V2 and the Susvara. Okay. What did I hear in all of that? Well, the positive aspects of Topping's amplifiers all made it in here. You get an essentially absent, just complete black void sonic background. So there is basically no noise floor here that's ever going to be audible. That's good. The sound is also very squeaky clean and clear. Okay, so that made it in here too. And so the downsides that you often get from amplifiers of just them generating their own noise and that sort of thing just do not happen here. And so that part there is the strength, one of the strengths of Topping's line in general that has made it in here. Now, as far as other aspects go, I will say that this is the best Topping amplifier I have heard to date. And I just listed a moment ago that I've heard several of them. Okay. Some of my complaints from previous Topping amplifiers have been that they are over-smoothed to the point where they feel a little bit blunted and a little bit slurred, almost. And that has steadily improved with each passing model. Like, I mean, they almost had a sound like they were kind of stuck in the mud, almost. And like that got a little bit better as price went up and then also as newer generations came on. Like I thought the A30 Pro, which is newer than the original A90, was a little bit better than the A90 in that regard, but still not great. Okay, this unit takes yet another step forward in not sounding as blended together, as over-smoothed, as stuck in the mud as this one. Another analogy that I could think of is like if you picture being in a pool, and this might be somewhat of a horrifying analogy, but I think it kind of drives the point home. If you picture being underwater in a pool and then there's a layer of plastic over the surface of the pool, as you come up and you're trying to punch your way out, that's kind of what it felt like previous Topping amps were doing to the music, is that the music was in there just punching at that skin on top of the pool, trying to get out, and it just depended on the expense of the model and like the generation of the unit as to how thick and difficult it was to push against that skin that was over top of the pool. Now, to me, that effect has not completely disappeared in this amp, and I will get to why that is in a little bit, but it is the least in the way in that regard of the Topping amps thus far. All right, another place where Topping amps have struggled previously is in staging and like positional effects, imaging, separation, that kind of thing. This is again a step forward, but it's also not to the level where I would ever refer to this thing as giving a holographic spatial presentation. Okay, so again, better than previous Topping offerings, still not great, not spectacular. Okay. Another thing that I have noticed about previous Topping amps is that when you feed them with actual music signals, you put a sine wave through them and they will measure flat all the way down to 20 hertz. Okay, but you put a music signal through them and you ask them to reproduce, say, 30 hertz, at the same time that they're trying to reproduce a bunch of stuff from 300 hertz on up, okay, and anything in between, they will run out of gas and there will be a noticeable roll-off in the deep sub-bass. Like the descending bass line in the track Mountains by Hans Zimmer from the Interstellar film soundtrack has this big descending bass line in it. And you can just hear that disappear on topping amps before you hear it disappear on other amps from Shit or Lake People or JDS Labs, even, you know, that which has been another measurement chasing company traditionally and all that. So happens there. Okay, on toppings that doesn't there. Now, this again is a small step forward in that regard, but it still has not cured that issue. So there still is some deep sub-bass roll-off going on here on some of those things when you ask this to reproduce that really deep sub-bass at the same time that it's trying to reproduce the rest of the music in higher frequencies. All right, so what is that? I mean, where does that leave us here with the A90D? Like, it is improvement. It is the best topping amplifier to date. And somebody's probably going to grab that quote, take it out of context and plaster it somewhere. Okay. But being the best topping amp to date does not necessarily mean that it is anywhere near being the best option for a $600 headphone amplifier on the market right now. In my opinion, it's not particularly close to that. Okay? And it's for a lot of the reasons that I just explained there. Like, what it comes down to for me is like when you take into account all of the things that I mentioned here, where it's got a little bit blended together spatial presentation with not great separation. It just doesn't feel very holographic. It's also a bit wall of sound. There's not a lot of depth to it. Okay, when you talk about how it rolls off in the sub bass, it seems to run out of power. I think that's a power supply issue, honestly. Like, it's just not getting the power it needs for the power at the very low end, while at the same time doing all the things that it needs to do up top. I just don't know that the power supplies selected here are the best for power delivery over the whole frequency spectrum simultaneously. I think they're chosen because they pass a pure sine wave pretty much perfectly. Okay, but that. So then that just slightly kind of stuck in the mud sound. Much better, much improved, but just still there and detectable. And then, like, it's so macro focused. Like, what this does a good job of is it'll hit you. Like, it's a very physical amp now, and that has not always been a trait of topping either. They've somewhat been blunted in the dynamics at times. This one is not. Even with really hard to drive loads like the Susvara and like the HE6 SEV2, the initial punch on this amp is actually really impressive. Like, it hits hard. Okay, in the mid bass anyway, it will hit very hard, and it will give you a nice snap on snare drums and all of that. So like the dynamics here from a macro standpoint are improved and actually have reached the point of being objectively good. You figure it out, okay? The issue here is that there's just no real substance behind that initial macro level attack. There's a lot of missing micro detail in here. Room reverbs, ghost notes, let's see. Quiet, subtle sounds that are happening at the same time as those loud, big sounds do not come out as well on this amp as they do from other $600 and at times even cheaper amplifiers from other companies that use other amp topographies. Topologies? I'm probably saying a map thing on one and not a circuit thing, but anyway. And so it's very macro focused, and it just kind of makes it a skin deep amplifier as a result of that. Like, one of the reasons that the spatial presentation is not super holographic is, I think, because it is not pulling out that last bit of micro resolution, at least compared to its competitors at the same price, that are giving you those like subtle timing and change of pitch cues that help your brain like place things. It's just not pulling those out as well. And so it does not come across as textured or as detailed and all of that. So it's a very surface level, skin deep amplifier as a result of that. Now, it's not horrible. Like, this is, in a universal sense, a pretty decent headphone amplifier, I would say. The problem is it's not a $600 amplifier. If this were priced at $250 or $300, I could see an argument for it. It's just, for what it is at this price, again, it's overpriced, right? I just think that you can do a lot better and get a more complete, organic, natural, realistic sounding headphone amplifier at this price. Okay. As far as comparisons go, because I like to do comparisons. What I can compare this to, it has been a while since I have heard it, but the original A90. More macro level control on this one. I think it does take a step forward, and some significant ones in terms of like the macro dynamics and delivering that initial punch. I think they are similarly limited in terms of what happens quietly after that big macro dynamic punch. Like, they both lack the substance behind that initial hit that you get from competitors. Okay, this one is, I think, a little bit better in spatial presentation than the original A90. So again, that's also an improvement. I think it also is, I'm struggling to remember what I was about to say, but again, there are some improvements here over the A90. If you are forced to choose between A90 models, I do think that this one is worth the $100 bump up over the original, okay? So keep that in mind here. Now, as far as comparisons go with other brands, other companies, and same things here, I'm going to again ask you for your patience, because I recently reviewed the Lake People G111 Mark II, which I will put a link to down below. I reviewed this one, so I could compare these two, but I'm going to wait. And the reason that I'm going to wait is because I also have on hand the Shit Lyre Plus, or is it Lyre Plus? I will figure that out for the review, which is a hybrid tube and solid state headphone amp. Okay, and then I also have also from Apos, the Singer SA1 amplifier. And all of these three are also $599 US headphone amps. And so each of these are going to get their own review. This one already has. Okay, but those two are going to get their own reviews here shortly. And then when those are done, there will be a shootout video where I compare all four of these in detail. Now, what I'm going to do next is, first I'll wrap this up. Whereas, again, the topping A90D, yes, it measures beautifully. Yes, it is a black void sonic background. It sounds very clean and very clear, but it's a very, and it's improved the dynamics. It has improved the sense of speediness of the sound. Like, it doesn't sound as bogged down or stuck in the mud or as over smoothed as previous topping amps have. And it is a small improvement in holographicity, which really needs to be a word, but in spatial presentation from previous topping amps. But to me, it's still just far, far from the best option out there for a wide variety of headphones at the $600 price point. So I just think you could do a lot better with your $600 than you could with this one. And again, it is not to my financial benefit to say that, because if you use the link that I include in the description below to buy this, I would get a small kickback from Apos. But I'm telling you, don't do that. I think your $600 is better spent elsewhere. All right. So if that is all that you need to hear Thanks for watching. Please check out my PayPal and Patreon. And please remember to like and subscribe. And thanks for watching. Enjoy the music. If you would like to stick around, what I'm going to do next is attempt to, as briefly as I can, sort of explain this disconnect between why does this measure so well and why do other topping amps measure so well, but then struggle with spatial presentation and sometimes struggle with dynamics and struggle with micro detail retrieval and that sort of thing. What's going on there? I'm going to try to unpack that a little bit in the next segment. So if you're interested in that, please stick around. If you're good, thanks again for watching and enjoy the music. Okay, so some of you may be out there thinking that I have utterly lost my mind and I have no idea what I'm talking about because these topping amps measure just about perfectly. And there are many people out there, particularly in the YouTube sphere amongst reviewers, that just fawn over these things. And here I am being maybe that crazy guy out on the limb that is saying, actually, no, they're not that great. Okay, what's going on there? What's the disconnect? The thing that I can't fully explain is why we reviewers are hearing it so differently. There are many reasons that could be, in terms of we have different preferences. Our brains, human brains, when they are listening to music, they are recognizing patterns, right? Like you are understanding my words right now, hopefully, because I'm just a big hairy ape grunting and hissing into a microphone. But you, also being apes of variable size and hairiness, are hearing those grunts and hisses, and if you generally agree on what those grunts and hisses mean, we have communication. Like, that's just an example of pattern recognition. I am making patterns of sound that you are hearing, okay, and interpreting and assigning meaning to, hopefully. Music, as I define it, is the creative assembly of patterns of sound. All right, and so what this music gear that we're trying to do, with all of this audio gear here is reproduce those patterns of sound as accurately as we can, or alternatively, in ways that we find enjoyable. Now, because of the way our ears are built and because of our life experiences and how brains work, and that yes, we're recognizing patterns, but our life experiences will shape which patterns we find most meaningful and most important and all of that kind of thing. That to me is like a lot of the difference between reviewers and all of that. Like I have been exposed, I have had the fortune of being exposed to a wide variety of live music for years and for most of my life, really, okay? For years and years and years. All of that, and it's still happening. Like I'm still going to kids band concerts and got a kid learning to play violin and going to orchestra concerts and just all kinds of stuff all the time. Okay, so for me, what I listen for is how close does a piece of audio gear, be it a headphone amp or a headphone or a digital analog converter or whatever the case may be, like how close does it get to sounding like the real thing, as my brain understands the real thing to sound like. All right. That's what I'm looking for when I review. Now, sound is a wave of mechanical energy traveling through a physical medium, okay? And when we get it into an electrical signal, what we get are these waves, these transverse waves of electromagnetic energy that are electromagnetic representations of those mechanical waves that are traveling through the air or water or wherever it is we're listening. Usually we humans listen in air. Okay. So they're sine waves, really. Sound waves can be modeled with sine waves. So a sine wave is just a pure tone. Now a music wave is the combination of a bunch of sine waves all stacked up on top of each other and added together. All right, and I'll try to put some pictures at the bottom of the screen to help that make sense a little bit. a little bit more. What measurement gear is doing with topping it with any amp, okay? What some measurement gear has done is it has taken some sine waves and it sweeps them through frequencies, which we hear as pitch, to hear how, to see what the amp or DAC or whatever, the headphone, like how it handles those at all of the individual frequencies. And then it also will like put a pure sine wave through to see how much that sine wave either does or does not change from the source, to measure things like how much distortion happens and that sort of thing. To a limited extent, most measurement rigs can at times put through multiple tones at once just to see how well gear does when there are a few, a small number of tones stacked up on top of each other, a small number of pure sine waves stacked up on top of each other. And so because every sound that we hear is the summation of a bunch of individual sine waves, it makes sense to use sine waves to test gear. However, every sound that we hear, like if we were to just hear a pure sine wave, we would get really annoyed because it just sounds really unnatural and unpleasant. Pretty much every sound that we hear is already a combination of multiple sine waves going on at once. So every individual string of every individual instrument on a string instrument or whatever, or every key on a piano, or every drum head that gets struck, something like that, okay, is going to produce multiple sine waves at once that are all on top of each other. And so when you start assembling music, okay, when you start getting multiple vocals, like our vocal cords are doing the same thing, you start getting multiple vocalists and or multiple instruments, okay, and all of that kind of stuff going on at once, the sine wave that ultimately reaches our ears is just a very chaotic and complex looking amalgamation, summation of a bunch of sine waves. So that's what music is. Okay, the test tones that get put through measurement rigs and then ultimately used to measure something like this are inauthentic in terms of trying to reproduce actual music. And they're also not dynamic. They don't change in time that the way real music signals do. Okay, so it's a bit of an inauthentic test there. Now, why does this matter here? I called the A90D a skin deep amp. It does really good on the initial hit of something, but then there's not nearly as much substance behind it, subtle stuff behind it, as there is from competing amplifiers. Okay, so picture it this way. I'm going to try this analogy and let's see how it works here. The amplifier, what an amplifier's job is to do is to move the driver inside of a headphone or a speaker, like the cone or dome or planar thing that vibrates back and forth to make the sound. Like the amplifier makes that thing move, makes it move back and forth like this, okay? Vibrate back and forth at the same frequency as the signal that is being amplified, right? That's ideally what's going on. All right, if we were to put a pure sine wave through an amplifier into a speaker, you would hear the pure tone, and that would just be the driver moving back and forth uniformly, okay, nice and clean. Now, you start putting an actual, like even spoken word, but especially a music signal through there, and yes, there will be these bigger oscillations going back and forth of the fundamental frequencies, but then as that's happening and it's moving back and forth, we've got a bunch of little tiny vibrations going on with it. What I think is going on is that an amplifier like the topping here is so focused on the pure sine waves that it gets this part really great. It does not get these little wiggles in there very well, okay? It's so focused on not distorting that it loses its ability to control these tiny little things that are going on in the midst of the big movements. So what does that mean? Let's just take that analogy one step farther. Picture trying to lift anything. Like let's just say you're doing a bench press at the gym or a push-up, okay? Something like that. If you're on the bench press, you've got the bar, okay, out here, and you bring it down to your chest and then you go back up. All right? Nice, smooth motion. So that is analogous to a amplifier amplifying a sine wave, just down, up, okay? One complete cycle there, kind of like just a pure sine wave. What a music signal is asking an amplifier to do, if we're going to take that analogy to this bench press analogy here, is that as you are benching, then you are vibrating, you're wiggling your hands up and down at also various sizes, okay, at a bunch of times, like on top of each other, as you are doing this bigger movement, okay? Think about how hard that would be to do, okay? To take your bench press weight or do a push-up this way, or to walk up a set of stairs where with each step you have to bounce up and down a little bit in controlled motions as you're taking your step up or down, right? Like, that's really, really difficult to do, but that is essentially the analogy of what we are asking amplifiers to do to speaker drivers or headphone drivers, that sort of thing. For whatever reason, Topping's basic design, to my ear, seems to be really focused on this and not on these. Right? That's what's lacking. And these are where the subtle details that help with positional effects, that help with micro detail resolution, that help it sound like not veiled or like not stuck in the mud, like those kinds of things. Like that's what those smaller things are often doing. They're not just about reproducing higher frequency sounds, although they are that, but they are sometimes about, you've got these tiny little details that are hidden in really subtle, small pitch changes, okay, going on in there. And the amplifier needs to have enough control to handle those tiny little changes that are happening on top of the big changes, okay, at the same time. To my ear, that is where Toppings are falling down. They are not doing that small stuff the way that, like, for example, come here, the Lake People G111 Mark II is doing. Like, not even close, okay? So that we don't have a way to measure that I know of yet. So we use the next best tool that we have, and that's our ears and our brains to be able to detect that. And I will be the first to admit, because I have studied this, okay? PhD in physics, PhD in STEM education, where I did a lot of research on the teaching and learning of physics. And trust me, I did a lot of brain science to understand how all of that fits together. And so believe me, I get it. I know that our ears and our brains and our senses and the way our brains process information and all of that can be deeply flawed and easily fooled. Okay, believe me, I know that. But they can be deeply flawed and easily fooled and still be the best tools that we have available right now to do certain jobs. And I think this is one of those cases. Okay, so with experience, with practice, with understanding what sound is and how amplification works and all of that, I think that anyone can learn how to pick out these details that I am talking about. Okay. So I hope that analogy of the, kind of jerky bench press, if you will, helps make some sense as to what's going on here. Like, we can't really measure this, to my knowledge, have no real meaningful way to do that, especially because music is so dynamic and ever-changing that what these little motions are just, they're so different up here than they are down here and vice versa, that it is really difficult to do that with any kind of consistency. All right. But yeah, I will go ahead and leave it there. If you have stuck around to watch this, I appreciate it. Let me know in the comments if you think that this idea here has any merit to it, all that. So anyway, I'm Wave Theory. Thanks for sticking this one out. Like, subscribe, do all of those things. Thanks for watching, and as always, enjoy the music.